Whilst discourse and envy in mighty kingdoms dwell, the beggar lives at ease within his humble cell, and a day will go, and a day will go.
Greetings, and welcome once again to Scoundrels Alley. My name is Eric Seitz. It's a bit different today. The other mendicants that are usually with me, well, they're out doing their own vagaries, and I'm here stuck in Stopole Abbey. Now, Stopole Abbey, just so you'll understand, that's the criminal cant phrase for our secret hideout. Now, it moves around, so nobody ever really knows where it's at from place to place to place. Today, I'm in our secret lair. That's the back room of Greasy Gert's Gas Grub and Sushi Bar. But if I were you, I wouldn't try the sushi here. Come to think of it, I wouldn't try sushi anywhere. Why would anybody eat sushi? Anyway, that's beside the point. After our last video on the introduction of the Scoundrels, we actually did get some questions that I wanted to cover. They were questions that had to do with the history, the back history of Scoundrels and canting crews and where they came from, where they were going. Would you have seen them? Would you not have seen them? How would you see them? Where would we have been? So I do want to thank Biff and Muffy and all the cool kids down at the dairy bar for coming up with these great questions. And as for the rest of you, well, remember, hit that like button, subscribe, and get all of our information, and do share this with your friends. Your mother just wants to hear from you. The time period that we represent is about 1750 to 1820, 1825, thereabouts. That's when our vagaries are going on, though the vagaries that we've chosen to portray have been going on much longer than that, hundreds of years, actually. The cant itself and the language dates back to probably the 13th century or the 14th century along in there. It starts being written about as early as the 15th century. Between the 16th century and the 19th century, it becomes very romanticized. We have tremendous amount of plays and poetry written about them, stories written about them that we can take from this. The first cant dictionary itself was in 1699 by a man by the name of B.E. Ghent. Now, Ghent, we think, just refers to gentleman. We're really not sure what his name was. But he writes, the name of his dictionary, a new dictionary of the terms ancient and modern of the canting crew in its several tribes of gypsies, thieves, cheats, etc. Now, this itself is considered the first true slang dictionary in English language. It has over 4,000 entries, so it's a fascinating book to look at. Interestingly enough, some of the same words that we find in this book, I should say that the reason that it's so popularized, and I reference it so much, B.E. Ghent's book will be the first slang book, and it will hold sway over all of the other slang dictionaries we have well into 1890. So when we're looking at cant words, if I trace them back to Ghent, I know they've been around at least that long, if not longer. Ghent himself is taking from three primary sources: Thomas Dekker, Harman, and a man by the name of Audley. The words, still some of the words that survive today and you use would be like kidnap, sham, tip, shoplift, gypsy, double cross, tidbit or titbit, snigger or snicker. These are all words that are in common use. My favorite is transmogrification. These are all words that I found related to the cant and the early cant slang dictionary, which will become flash language later. So it still survives today in that way. Now, as to where they were found, that was another question that was brought up. There might have been some confusion in where we were and what we were doing. Again, if I'm looking at what Ghent's saying in his preface, and he's taking a lot of his information, again, from the 16th century information that he's getting from Audley and Harman, that they say that these are in all Christian nations. Now, they differentiate Christian nations because of the idea of Christ and giving to people. So the idea was a Christian nation, by its very tenets, was a more giving people. They were more inclined to give to the poor, give to the widows, give to the orphans. I don't want to get in an argument of politics or religion, and I won't. I'm just going to tell you what I can find out based upon what these men were writing. Because of that, they were called the traveling people, and Ghent goes on to say that every Christian country has them. Now, in French, they were called Bohemia. In Italy, they were called Zingari. Spaniards, Itanus. English, gypsies, were Egyptians before the Roma got stuck with the name. He also goes on to say that Holland has no beggars because they're all beggars, and they're the biggest beggars of all. He also goes on to say that Switzerland has no thieves because all the Swiss are soldiers and they're the biggest thieves of all. Okay, we have our opinions in the 18th century and the 17th century, just like we do today. But they were all over, and they started out mostly as beggars, but not only in their vagaries, they were thieves, they were pickpockets, they were faders, or what we would call fortune tellers today, and they traveled all around. You have to understand that when they traveled all around, there's not a lot of population that we have like we do today, so it was much easier to get the idea that we have to travel from place to place to place, because not any one place can really afford a whole group of people just to come in and beg all over the place. The question was asked, how many people were in a canting crew? We don't know. Could have been 2, could have been 20, could have been 30. There's no really rhyme or reason. A standard crew that I would work with as a sharper is going to be probably a minimum of 6. In this time period, it's just my wife and I. But to run a big street, I'm going to run 6 or 7 people. But as far as the earliest ones that would go, Harmon's going to make a list of them. And then later on, in 1637, a man by the name of Richard Head is going to write a book. I love the title of this book. The title is The Canting Academy, or The Devil's Cabinet Opened, wherein is shown the mysterious and villainous practices of that wicked crew, commonly known by the names of Hectors, Transpanners, Gilts, etc., to which is added a complete canting dictionary, both of old words and such as are now most in use, with several new catches and songs composed by the choicest wits of the age. I just think it's kind of a neat book. But anyway, in the book itself, he lists the original order of rogues that Harmon will list. There's an upright man, a ruffler, an angler, a rogue, a prigger of prancers, a palyard, a freighter, a queer bird, the mumpers, benfiekers, an Abram man, a whip jacket, a patrico, an Irish toil, a swigman, a kinchin cove, and a clapperdogeon. As to who these people were, just stay tuned. We'll talk about this in another video. But those are the original group. So there we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. 17 of which a couple of them, the palyard and the clapperdogeon, are the same person. So essentially we have 16 people of the original crew. The original names. Now it doesn't mean there are 16 people, because there could be many anglers. There could be a number of prigger prancers, which are horse stealers. There could have been as many clapperdogeons as there were palyards, or vice versa. So that just gives you some idea that the crews range anywhere from 2 people to however many you can fit in a hedgerow. As for the colonies, the criminal element mostly gets over here in the beginning of the early part of the 18th century, when the Transportation Act takes place in England. The Transportation Act of 1721, basically England empties her prisons and starts sending them all over here under 7-year indentureship, forced indentureship. We've actually written an article called Colonial Dumping Ground. You'll find it in Reliving History magazines, published by our really good friends at Sampson Leather. It was this past issue and the summer issue that you can find that. Now, when they came over here, they found some problems, and I'm going to give you 2 examples of the problems they found with 2 specific people that Susan and I talk a lot about extensively. One was Bamfield Moore Carew. Now, he's transported over here in the 1740s, and when he gets over here, he escapes. He immediately escapes. The idea of transportation was the captain comes over and he sells your indentureship there at the wharf for 7 years. Well, he takes off, he escapes, and he goes around and spends about 7 months in the colonies trying to do what he did over in London. He first tries to pass himself off as a beggar. The problem is he can't get any money because there's no money over here. Nobody has any money. They're all broke. There's nothing here for him to beg. George Whitefield being the exception. He did scam George Whitefield, the preacher, out of a bit of money. So he tries to pass himself off as a rat catcher. The problem was, in the 1740s, there are no rat catchers in America. They have no idea what they are and why are you here and what do we care if there's rats here. We've got cats for that problem. Then he tries to pass himself off as an Irish itinerant boat builder. The problem is he can't find a jarkman or a scriber basically a counterfeiter, to write him up a paper proving who he was. So he's stuck. So he hops a ship and goes back to London and starts his vagaries all over again there. He'll be transported again a few years later, but this time on the way over, he makes a bet with the captain of the ship that he will get back to London before the captain of the ship can offload the cargo, sell the transportation torch into slavery, reload his cargo with a return, probably tobacco to sold, and Banfield Carew would make it back, which is exactly what happened. Carew escapes from the ship, and just as they reach the harbor, he hops another ship, and when the captain of the original ship reaches back to London with his harbor, with his load full of tobacco, there's Banfield Moore Carew going, haha, I told you so, you owe me whatever the bet was. I haven't found what the bet was yet. Banfield Moore Carew, though, will leave vagaries. And the reason we know so much about him is because he came from a wealthy family, and right after that transportation, he leaves the life of the mendicants, goes back to his family, and writes his memoirs. The other one was Mary Webb, or Jane Webb, or Jenny Diver, however she was known. She became very wealthy even while she was in prison awaiting transportation because she ran what was called a lost property office. Basically, she was a fence. So when she's finally transported to the colonies for theft the first time, she brings with her 4 cartloads of goods to sell. She pays the captain off as soon as she gets on the boat, so she's not stuck in the hold with the rest of the convicts. She's in the best cabin. She just has a discussion with the captain about how much the captain she would get for her indentureship, which was for her about 7 pounds. She was a woman. And so she just pays him. So when he gets to shore, he releases her because she's already paid her own indentureship. She's there for about 6 months. Can't find anything to sell. Nobody has anything that she can steal and rebuy. So there's nothing for her to do. So once again, she takes a ship back to England and starts all over again. It's caught a second time, transported again, immediately turns around, goes back to London, caught a third time, and then hung, because you're really not supposed to skip out on your indentureship like that. There was nothing here, and that was one of the problems. Now, my personal character as a sharper, they do begin to thrive here in the colonies, and that's the wonderful thing. Now, the names change and the language changes. For instance, we no longer have canting crews, but we have hustle gangs and street gangs. The difference is a hustle gang is basically a sharper and his crew, but we're going to change their name. Where I have a sharper, I'm the sharper, I have a Bo Peep, I have a sweetener. Those names change. Now I'm called an operator. My Bo Peep becomes a lookout. My sweeteners become a shill. I add a couple of gates, and we begin to play our little games on the street. Somebody asks, will we be able to see Christopher's games? Actually, yes, you can see Christopher's games. You go to any street corner of any big city of any country in the world right now, you hang around long enough, and you'll see some guys playing these games just like that. Just like Christopher's been doing, just like the sharpers have been doing for 500 years. And here's a piece of advice: don't play it for money. The other people were the street gangs. Now, the street gangs in the later 18th century and all the way up through really what's happening today in our modern world, they're affiliated with political movements mostly, and they're mostly fueled by ethnics and immigrants. And so we began to see that. For instance, Boston in the Revolutionary War, tremendous amount of street violence and street gangs were there, but they were politically motivated to get things going and to get people on their side. You see it all the way through the 19th century, and especially if you watch the movie Gangs of New York, was a very good example of that, in that they would meet the immigrants at the ship. Oh, you're Jewish immigrants, you go with this family. Oh, you're Irish immigrants, you go with this family. German immigrants, you go with that family. And they began their own street gangs, and they ran their own little criminal empires up there. Now, there's no place to hide over here. And that was the other issue we had. By no place to hide, the best example we can give is London in about 1728, 1729. I'd have to look to make sure. They have a population of about 63,000 people. London then becomes the largest city in the West, surpassing Paris. Now, between 1728, 1729, and 1800, London will grow in size to a population of about 1 million, about 1.2 million actually. So there's places there to hide. There's people that will have things that we can hide, that we can run through and use. In the colonies, or in the 1800, what would become the United States of America, the 13 original colonies, now the 13 states, it's going to have a total population of about 5.2 million. So if you can imagine that the city of London has 1 million, and 5 times that amount of people are now placed in a continent, a huge giant continent, bigger than all of Europe itself. And you can see the problem, because we come into town, we try our vagaries, we try our thievery. There's no place for us to hide, because as soon as somebody says, oh, this is missing, they immediately start looking for 2 people. They look at the usual criminal suspects. The boys just have to have a good time. And they look for people they don't know, that are unusual and different. Well, who are they going to go after? They're going to go after us first. And Carol will be discussing the plight of the poor in this country. A little better for the poor is they at least got some structure where the thieves didn't. And we had no transportation over here. You were punished. Now, the idea, though, here in the colonies, though, we took our crime very seriously. For us, it was go big or go home. In 1720s, John Law will approach the French government, which is broke because of all the wars and everything else that's going on in Philip's spending. And he has a plan to make the land in the Mississippi River Valley very lucrative and to be sold for a whole lot more than it's worth. What he does is he has the French government empty all the prisons. He takes all the male prisoners, forces them to marry the prostitutes that are on the ship, on the streets of Paris, chains them together, puts them on a ship, sends them over there to populate the Mississippi River Valley. Oh, look, we've got a lot of people that want to go here. It must be worth something. Let's sell the land. Okay. It worked out for a while, and then they got caught because it was just a big land scam. We jumped forward to 1831. John Murrell, he's a gambler, a river pirate on the Mississippi River, and not a nice man. He comes up with an idea called the Clan of the Mystic Confederacy. He runs about a group of 2,000 criminals up and down the Mississippi River Valley, well into the Ohio River Valley, from pretty much Mississippi, New Orleans, all the way up to Louisville, Kentucky. They come up with this plan, and they spread the rumor that in December of 1831, December 13th, that the slaves, all the slaves in the South were going to have this huge uprising. The idea was, if we can convince everybody up and down the river that the slaves are going to revolt, they're all going to take off on that day and go put the slaves down. What that does is that leaves every town from New Orleans all the way up to Louisville completely exposed. These men, these 2,000 men, could then go in, loot the town, and pretty much turn the entire Mississippi River Valley and Ohio River Valley into nothing but one giant criminal conspiracy. They got caught. They were found out. It didn't work, actually. That was pretty much the end of river piracy in the Mississippi River Valley. But it was a good try. It just didn't work out too well. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea of the criminal background. In future videos, I'm going to be discussing law enforcement, what happened and why it works. Also coming up, we've got Penelope on the life of an Irish toil. Old Badger's going to be talking about the glamorous life of a resurrectionist. We had no idea it was so glamorous, if that's what you want to call it. Maggie's going to speak about the plight of the poor. We'll have discussions on language, discussions on women's roles, discussions on jobs, both legal and questionable. Simply put, Susan and Penelope and Maggie are going to talk about women's roles in the criminal world, and they weren't just prostitutes. So don't just sell the women short. Oh, I'm going to get in trouble for that one, but whatever. Susan's going to talk about jobs that were nasty and should not have been done, and Carol will be talking about jobs that were nasty but needed to be done. And of course, we're going to have the mailbag to answer any more questions that you might come up with. And we do, again, invite those questions. So remember, as we always say, hit the like button, subscribe, share this with your neighbors. Happy canting, and we'll see you down the road.
Contented when death through nature approaches nigh. In pleasure thus we live, and in pleasure thus we die. And